J is for justice, so that is our theme for today. A very topical one.
You mean because of the increasing attempts by Western governments to direct legislation and jurisdiction?
Exactly.
Okay, then. J for justice. I was particularly interested in this question in the early 70s, in the wake of the student movement. There was a number of examples in France of what then was called class justice.
You mean obviously arbitrary judgments against workers, migrants, and similar groups? And against political activists, especially from the left wing spectrum?
Exactly. What's more, the situation in prisons back then was really terrible. Overcrowded cells, poor hygiene, bad food, arbitrary violence, and so on.
You then founded the Prisons Information Group to make public the conditions in the penal system and transform them into a subject of critical discussion.
It was against this background that I gave my lectures at the Collège de France, especially on the punitive society in 1972. And some years later, all of this went into my book, Discipline and Punish.
And into your discussion with Noam Chomsky.
That's right. He was quite irritated by my statements.
Yeah, they were pretty Marxist back then.
That's right. For example, I argued that justice is an idea which, in effect, has been invented and put to work in different types of societies as an instrument of a certain political and economic power, or as a weapon against that power. And I also went on to explain that the notion of justice itself functions within a society of classes as a claim made by the oppressed class and as a justification for it.
Chomsky wouldn't accept that. Later, he even said that you obviously didn't inhabit the same moral universe as he.
Yeah, I actually meant something quite simple, though. Ultimately, it was a kind of historical argument. My point was that the history of the penal system, that is, what courts and prisons actually do, is largely unexplored. People do the history of law and the history of the economy, but the history of the judicial system, of judicial practices, of what has in fact been a penal system, of what have been systems of repression, all of this is rarely discussed.
That's why you did discipline and punish.
Yes. But I was interested in the history of judicial practices much earlier, especially in my book on the history of madness. You see, there I showed how changes in the practice of justice in the 18th century led to a decisive shift in psychological discourses. From the early 1790s on, trials for crimes of passion had to be held in France before a jury and in open court. Now, in a sense, society then became a tribunal on the individual. And this might be not so bad per se, and from the point of view of justice, it appears even to be progressive. Nevertheless, this practice of jurisdiction reinforced discourses in which only the individual is seen as responsible for its own pathology. This creates an individual psychology which is actually a moral discourse.
I think we are facing that again today.
Um, you mean that any deviant behavior or being is only understood in terms of the moral guilt of the individual?
Yes,
Oh, this has been going on for a long time. When it comes to mental illness, in particular, our society sees itself as less and less responsible. Huh? People are simply declared pathological and then locked away. No care, no therapy whatsoever. And to come back to the beginning of our conversation, I think what we are experiencing today is something slightly different. It is the transformation of legislation and jurisdiction into a system of preventive fight against crime. And at the same time, a law enforced movement against deviation and resistance, including at universities.
I think I really need to look again into your work on the punitive society. Thank you so much for today.
Oh, you're welcome.